In late January, which now feels like a lifetime ago, Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, and Spain came together to create the E6, a new European grouping that aims to forge ahead with projects of integration to improve the EU's competitiveness and sovereignty. In the readout after their inaugural meeting, the E6 announced that their first priority, apparently ahead of both internationalising the euro and coordinating defence spending, was, quote, pressing ahead with the Capital Markets Union. So in this video, we thought we'd explain what the Capital Markets Union, sometimes also known as the Savings and Investment Union, actually is, and why the E6 think it's so important. We've heard a lot of talk about Europe de-risking or decoupling from the US recently. So in the latest issue of our magazine, we thought we'd discuss whether it's actually feasible and why Europe could still struggle without US backing. That's just one of the 72 pages in the magazine, because as always, there's more to too long than you'd expect. Purchase your copy by clicking the link in the description. So, probably the best way to understand what the Capital Markets Union actually is to first imagine you're an entrepreneur in Europe. You've got an idea for a business, but you now need some financing to actually get it off the ground. The obvious place to go is probably a bank, but banks don't generally like lending to small businesses because they're considered systemically important. In other words, if the banks go bust, they take the rest of the economy down with them, which means that governments subject them to lots of regulation that essentially discourages risky loans. So if the bank says no, your next move is to try what are known as capital markets. In other words, go and find some non-bank institution or investor willing to lend you the money. Broadly speaking, there are two options here. There's the private market and there's the public market. When we talk about the private market, we're basically talking about finding some other venture capitalist or other private investor who'll lend you the money. And when we talk about the public market, we're basically talking about listing your company and selling shares in it on a publicly traded stock exchange. Although we should say that listing or going public usually happens later down the line, once your company has some brand recognition or a proven track record. Anyway, the problem with Europe is that both sides of the capital market, the private side and the public side, are too fragmented. On the private side, venture capitalists in one member state don't really invest in other member states. It's difficult, say, for a startup in Latvia to attract funding from investors in, say, Poland. This problem is slightly less acute in bigger member states, like, say, Germany, where there's a lot more money sloshing about, and thus more accessible financing within the national borders. But even in those larger member states, the situation is suboptimal. For starters, there might not be enough investors around your specific industry. If you're an AI company, for instance, you're probably going to be better off in France than Germany. And more generally, these national markets still can't compete with the US, which is why lots of European startups end up moving to America, and one of the big reasons why US startups seem to scale better. Similarly, Europe's public markets are also very fragmented. There are over 30 different stock exchanges in the EU, meaning more than one per member state, with the vast majority being small, national, or even regional stock exchanges. Most of these are, to be frank, pretty much redundant. You can't raise large amounts of money from them, and many of them haven't seen new listings in years, because companies have essentially decided that they're better off going public elsewhere, like in the US, or just sticking with private markets and avoiding the bureaucratically burdensome process of going public altogether. The EU does have a couple of pan-European exchanges. There's Euronext, which spans Belgium, France, Greece, Ireland, the Netherlands, Italy, Norway, and Portugal. And there's Nasdaq Nordic, which spans Sweden, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland. But none of these are truly European. Again, this is very much unlike the US, where the public market is dominated by the New York Stock Exchange and the Nasdaq, which both have market capitalizations more than 5 times that of Euronext. Anyway, the Capital Markets Union is essentially, as the name suggests, a plan to unify Europe's capital markets on both the private and public side. The key thing to understand here is that the Capital Markets Union isn't a binary thing that can be turned on by a single piece of legislation. It's a gradual process. After all, it's not like intra-European investment doesn't exist. Germans do invest in French companies, and vice versa, at least sometimes. It's just it doesn't happen enough. Ideally, in the Capital Markets Union, it would be as easy for a German investor to invest in France or any other member state as it is in Germany. Instead of 27 segregated pools of capital, there would be one massive pool of money. This would be great for the European economy. Not only would it mean more financing for smaller companies, and thus more investment overall, it would also reduce the risk of European startups moving to America to meet their financing needs. This could be supercharged by getting Europeans to invest their savings, which is another one of the EU's big projects at the moment. For context, European households hold something like 35% of their assets in cash or bank deposits, compared to less than 15% in the US, where people tend to invest more of their savings. If the Capital Markets Union were to create one European pool of money, getting Europeans to invest would make this pool even bigger, and perhaps ultimately big enough to compete with the US. So how do we actually get here? Well, on the public side, the most obvious move would be to create one big pan-European stock exchange, an idea recently floated by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and perhaps let the other smaller ones die out. On the private side, the main thing is harmonizing national regulations. To give an illustrative example, different EU countries have different bankruptcy rules, and this discourages intra-European investment, because you're obviously less likely to invest in a company in another country if you're not sure what happens to it if it goes bust. This has long been the main obstacle to a proper capital markets union, because member states have, as usual, struggled to agree on a single set of regulations, and this is why the E6 have apparently decided to plough on without the rest of the bloc. Another potential solution is what's known as the 28th regime, which would effectively involve the EU creating a set of European regulations for some fictional 28th member state, which real member states could then voluntarily align with if they wanted to. This is an idea that European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen seems keen on, and in January she announced the creation of something called EU Inc., which would basically allow European entrepreneurs to easily register a company in any member state. All in all, while the EU, or at least the E6, is clearly taking the idea more seriously, actually creating a capital markets union will require sustained political attention and effort over a number of years, which is generally pretty hard to come by in Europe. Now, if you're one to binge watch our videos, or in fact any news recently, it's very understandable that you might feel as though the world isn't super safe right now. You're probably doing all you can to at least feel in control of your online security. You're adding an extra 1 or capital letter to your passwords. But is that always enough? Well, luckily our sponsor this week, NordVPN, takes your safety seriously and expertly works to protect all of your data online. It's an unfortunate reality that online scams and phishing attacks are on the rise right now. With us getting bombarded with emails from our banks, social media accounts, and constant newsletters we forgot we even signed up to, it's easier than ever to click the wrong thing. But with NordVPN's certified anti-phishing tool, you don't need to worry about your online safety being compromised, as their Threat Protection Pro feature detects at least 85% of phishing websites, blocking millions of scams every single month. Even if one slipped through and you did reach a suspicious website, NordVPN's data encryption tools will protect against a number of other attacks, like malicious man-in-the-middle data breaches and intense DDoS attacks. And don't worry, if you're concerned about past sensitive information being compromised, NordVPN's dark web monitoring is always scanning for your details and passwords, and can actively notify you before you even notice. Their super handy NordPass feature will even upgrade those old passwords for you, and keep them all organized and safe in one place. NordVPN isn't just the fastest VPN on the planet, it's a much needed shield to protect you from all of the threats that exist online. So if cybersecurity is as important to you as it is to us, sign up to NordVPN today. Simply click the link in the description or go to nordvpn.com/TLDR, and not only will you get a massive discount, but you'll also get 4 extra months totally free. There's no better time to protect yourself, so once again, that's nordvpn.com/TLDR, and it's completely risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee.